and try to make things smaller. I've learned that over the years. I used to try to make things in one piece and move these giant units because it's so much easier to build it and assemble everything in the shop. But then you still have to move it in there and get it up on the wall, and you're building scaffolding.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Cabinetmaker Ben Scott from Maple Ridge, British Columbia. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Ben, thank you so much for being on the show.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Do you always get up this early, dude?
Not quite this early. I had to get up. I got up 45 minutes early today. So
I would say this is still the middle of the night for you.
It's just turned 5 o'clock in the morning. So,
well, thank you for getting up early and sharing your time with us.
It's my only chance really to do it, other than it would be too late for you guys. So, like after work would be 9 o'clock or when my kids go to bed. So,
yeah, Jeff and I start drinking by that point, and it would be a different show. Can you please tell me where exactly Maple Ridge, British Columbia is?
It's about 45 minutes east of Vancouver, British Columbia.
And is it a exurb, suburbs, urban?
I guess it's suburbs. It seems like it used to be a small town. It has grown a lot in the last 10 years, probably. Like Vancouver real estate has got so expensive, and people will sell out of there and make a pile of money and then move out to Maple Ridge.
Sure. Are you a native, a local?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I grew up here, so I always tell people it sounds weird, but I don't know where else I would really live. It's right on like mountains and lakes and everything are here, right on the edge of town. So it's hard to say I would go somewhere else.
I was talking to my boss, Brian Pontalillo, about you the other day. And he encouraged me once COVID has passed to come out to your area because according to his description, it's one of the most beautiful places he's ever seen. So I look forward to that.
I think that's probably the truth. So yeah. It's hard to argue that.
Can you tell me a little bit about the cabinet making business that you work for?
There's an owner technically, but he frames. He's been a carpenter and a house framer for 30 something years. And we just kind of worked together on a project and he ended up kind of acquiring a shop worth of cabinet tools. And then I just started making cabinets under his company basically. And I operated it completely on my own basically, and basically just don't have to worry about the bookkeeping. So I do everything.
How long have you been doing this? I made the observation earlier when we were talking before recording that you're one of the younger cabinet makers I've met, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. I started in high school, so it's 22 years, I guess now.
Wow. And how did you learn the craft?
Really, I did a few years of 3 or 4 classes a year in high school, and then just started right into it out of high school. I got a job right away and just kept on going. Went through my apprenticeship, which I know you guys talk about in Canada is a whole other thing. So
you have a red seal in cabinet making?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
it's technically called joinery is the real name.
And what does that program involve?
4 years, 6 week blocks of schooling every year.
And do they match you with an apprenticeship as part of that too?
No, most people. So there's kind of 2 ways to go about it. You can do I don't know what it's called right now. It's called foundations, I think. So you can do it's 6 or 10 months, I believe, that qualifies for your first year of your apprenticeship, like the first year of hours, and you come out with your first year kind of certificate, or you just get a job and then you have your employer that will sponsor you, I guess you would call it, and then you start going to school and go from there. And every year you go back and do your 6 weeks and pass that and go on to the next level.
I've heard of other folks who've gone through the program in various disciplines, and they feel like it does a pretty good job preparing you for the working world. Do you feel the same?
It's hard to say. They do teach you. They teach you how to work and use tools and stuff. But when I went through it 20 years ago, it was really outdated back then. Even the books were from the 60s, and the curriculum was pretty outdated. They tried to update it a little bit with CNC programming, a little bit of that, and a little bit of AutoCAD drawing and things like that. But I know they're still constantly struggling to get it updated to somewhat of a normal current level now. I'm friends with a guy that's a teacher there now, and he says it's just this constant battle to try to, I guess, basically get enough funding or enough time to get it up to
And
date.
things have changed quickly in the
Oh yeah,
past decade or 2 decades, right? So I'm sure
yeah,
that's a challenge.
yeah.
Did you have an interest in like carpentry and cabinet making when you were a little kid? Did you have someone in the family that introduced you to it?
I don't really. We lived out in the I don't know what you call it. I always say out in the bush, but out on the outskirts of town. So we had a 2 acres to mess around on and build stuff and break things and everything else. My dad was a Toyota mechanic for 50 years, so we were always working on things and building things. And he's really interested in electronics and stuff. So I was more interested in that, I guess, when I was younger, and then it just kind of turned into cabinet making. I know my uncle in Quebec had a was a cabinet maker as well, but didn't really spend any time with him or have any influence with him. There was pieces of furniture around our house that he made for my mom when she was younger, but no real kind of influence on it.
Did you like the pieces of furniture he made? Were they some
No, not
like
really.
no?
No, I don't know what I don't even know what the style would be. It was all pine and raised panels, but with round like raised panel shaker doors and with round inlays on top of it, thick round inlays and strange panels with like pyramid shapes and stuff. I don't know whether that was. I need to look that up and see if that's kind of an Acadian sort of style or something like that, because I've never seen anything like that.
I can say when I visit Quebec, I see lots of things I'd never seen before. It is
I think that's a pretty good rule.
we were talking a little bit about it ahead of the show. What are some of the challenges of being a cabinet maker, and what do you like about it?
I guess that for me, the challenges are always the timing and coordinating with the contractors in the site, and um, as everything ever says on these podcasts as well, finding skilled labor, people willing to want to do cabinet making and want to learn it. Um, and just the timelines are always difficult because we are at the end of the job, so the job can be 6 months behind, but we're still on the hook right at the end to get it finished. So that causes me a lot of frustration and stress. Things I like about it, I really do like building things. I like what we build. We do really modern cabinets and furniture and lots of different things all the time. So I really do like doing that. It's mainly is just if it was a hobby, I would love it. If doing it 50 or 60 hours a week gets a little much sometimes, but
Sure. And do you have employees that are helping you get this stuff done? I'm sure you do. What are their roles?
I've got 2 women actually that work in the shop mainly. One of them's been here 5 years, and she's done the full training through the schooling, so she's got that. And then there's another woman that started, I guess, February or March, and she has no experience really, but was working around her house for a long time and wanted to change in her career and got into it, and she kind of just goes for it, and she can do a lot of things really well for having no experience essentially. So that's been good to have somebody to kind of teach again and that wants to learn.
Do you find that women are good students of the trades because they are willing to listen? They don't have a lot of ego. That I mean, we're talking in stereotypes.
I've only had these two women, and they seem like they definitely there isn't the ego type thing that you get of don't tell me how to do it, I know how to do it. all of that stuff that sometimes goes along with it. So they do learn and listen and try to do things properly instead of having it helps too that both of them never really have had any job in it before. The one girl that's gone through all of her schooling, she did the 10-month kind of intro course, and she did it at a different school that qualified for her first 2 years of her apprenticeship. So she came out and had to just do 2 more years of school at BCIT, which is the place where you have to go. The one school can do that entry level program, and then you have to go to BCIT, which is British Columbia Institute of Technology, for the last 3 and 4 years to get your final fourth year certification, and then write the test for your red seal.
I think that's very interesting. I'd like to talk to one or both of them on the show about their experience learning to be cabinet makers. You're a regular podcast listener, and you emailed recently in response to a conversation I had with Brian and Rob about my own cabinet building fiasco. You said you could really use some advice on how to install drawer slides, I quote. And of course, this is true. So can you help us out by explaining how I should have told folks how to do this?
Well, step one would be to, I would assume, as you referred to your cheap Chinese drawer slides, you separate. I would assume they can be separated, like all of those drawer slides. So I always separate them, and then screw the part that goes on the cabinet onto the cabinet straight and square and everything else, and then you can make a line, like figure out where you want your drawer box to sit in relation to those slides, and then just make a center line for the portion that goes on the cabinet. And then
which then lines up with all the holes, right, on the slide.
Right.
Yeah. So your line that you've drawn on the drawer box aligns with the holes in the slide that goes on the box.
Yeah, in the center line of the portion that goes on the drawer box, and then screw it on and slide them in, and make your drawers 1 1/16 inch smaller, not an inch.
I learned that a couple cabinets ago.
Yeah.
Another cabinet maker wrote in and suggested cutting a piece of scrap plywood or MDF or whatever. You use a story pole to lay out your slides. This cabinet maker in Queens uses a piece of plywood that holds the slide level on the box, and then he keeps cutting it down from top to bottom, which I thought was a pretty...
Start at the top so you don't compound errors, and start at the bottom and something goes on a slant, and then you slant everything more and more and more. Start at the top and go down.
Tell me honestly, have you really screwed up a cabinet in recent memory?
Lots of times.
Yeah.
Lots of times.
What's the most common mistake?
Not so much recently, but years ago, kind of at the first shop I worked at, it wasn't as kind of, I hadn't learned kind of the systems and seen all the different ways you can possibly do things. So there was lots of kind of like you're doing, of just, we're going to do it. And this is the way that somebody came up with an idea, and you just were doing it. There's so many things that we used to do that once I worked at another shop and learned, you can just have little jigs to hang a door on a cabinet. We just have a little jig that pre-drills the 2 little holes for the hinge plate to screw on in the right place every time. And the first shop, we would kind of just hold the door up and hope we got the gap right, and put some screws through the hinge plate into the gable and hope it worked, and then have to move them a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch, and chasing the same screw holes. It was never good.
Yeah, I'm sure. I know.
Once you can learn about the if you take a few minutes and think about the whole European system, if you're using that hardware, it is so simple, and if you just understand it a little bit, then suddenly it just becomes easy. Everything's easy. Everything, and the key is to just use metric, as all the Americans resist.
You don't know how you could possibly do that. That's crazy.
Just use it, and the holes go 37 millimeters from the front of the cabinet to the center of everything, and that's it. That's how it all works. Everything's 32 millimeters apart, not 1.25 inch, and then
it makes sense.
And it just works. Everything works.
And I should add that you're not using like a CNC to drill your holes and all that stuff. You're actually laying this out, right?
Yeah, well, we have a jig made by Bloom, the big hardware
Yeah.
manufacturer for drawer slides, and it just adjusts. And in my drawings, I can measure where the drawer goes and just put it on the drawing, and then it's all in millimeters, and you just adjust the jig to the millimeter on the drawing, and pre-drill holes in the gables of the cabinet, and then the slides just screw in.
You're gonna have to tell me what the gable is on a cabinet. I haven't. You've mentioned that twice, and I don't know
Oh,
what that
yeah,
is.
the side,
The side. Okay.
yeah, the vertical sides are gables.
Are they? Maybe in Canada.
I
And the
guess so.
same in the same regular podcast, we were discussing how to make Baltic birch cabinets, those with
Right.
exposed veneer edges, right?
Yep.
I guess you do a lot of that work. Is that correct?
I've done a fair amount of it over the years. Yep.
Any tips for that?
Well, it helps a lot since we have a sliding panel saw, so it's got a scoring blade on it that scores the underside of the sheet to not have chip out on the bottom side. If you're doing it on a normal table saw, or well, a track saw, you can get pretty good results because you have the strip to and the Festool ones have the splinter guard thing on them, and you can get a really good cut with those. Um, but a normal table saw, it's just like a really good triple chip or fine crosscut blade and a zero clearance throat plate, to have no chips. That's a big part of it. Um, and then really just do proper drawings and measurements and everything else, because you don't have any room to adjust it. You just have to cut it, and that's it. And then really you have to really prepare the edges well. That's something that I'm sure a lot of people would miss. Like we sand with 150 and then up to 320 on the edges, and then that makes the finish not just soak in, and you've got the long grain and end grain coming on the edge of the plywood, so it will really soak into the end grain versus the long grain on the plies. So preparing the edges is a big key to making it work out well.
And are you just using a normal random orb sander, or is there something special to sand this
Yeah,
stuff with?
we use air powered ones, but for the
And is
most
there a
part, it is.
risk? I mean, often these have kind of eased edges, right? Is there a
Yep.
risk of distorting that shape when you're hand holding a sander like
Well,
that?
if you're just kind of doing a single piece, we'll mostly do it by hand. But if there are multiple pieces that are roughly the same size, we'll stack them up to have a 2 or 3 inch kind of stack of them, and then you've got a big surface to not roll the edges or sand a big section out of the middle of it or something.
Yeah, screw it up in
Yeah.
short terms, right? I recently worked on an article with Finnish carpenter Aaron Butt in the Boston area. He was working on a kitchen's worth of frameless cabinets. He told me that he field verifies all the measurements and checks for plumb and square before his company's cabinet shop starts building the boxes. How do you ensure that the measurements you get are correct and that the space is framed plumb and square?
Um, I do all the measuring and drawing, so that is good for me, because then I don't have to pass that along to anybody else. And I laser level everything. Typically, I laser level things most of the time. We're doing things with a 3/4 inch or less reveal to the ceiling, so then I have to make sure that how far the floor is up or down, or the ceiling is up or down, and then just decide where it's going to sit within that variance, and if it's really bad, and it's a level of a house that they're willing to adjust things, which a lot of times they're not. Sometimes they are, or we just come up with a solution on how to deal with the 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch out of level situations, or more, sometimes even in a new house, is just usually what happens.
And is that commonplace that they'll fix stuff, or is it more commonplace that you have to fix it and match the conditions?
Most of the time we fix it. We come up with some kind of a solution to increase the reveal, or add some kind. Rarely do we add any kind of trim or anything to any. That's just not the look anywhere. Um, so most of the time, or if it is really bad, they'll maybe mud out the wall or something like that to fill up a gap. That's one of the last houses we did. The It was a floor to ceiling kind of pantry unit on the end of a run, and the wall leaned back probably 3/4 of an inch up to a window, but kind of luckily they were putting a mirror on the wall beside it, so they built out the mirror to cover up that gap, and then had to reline kind of the window return and clean all that up. So
It seems like if you build houses, you always have to fix something, right? It's like
yeah, oh,
nothing
yeah,
is, it's just, you got to make it work.
yep,
Another cabinet maker who was recently on the show, Dennis Bissett, told me that the natural tendency for good carpenters and cabinet makers is to make inset doors with super tight reveals because it looks better than bigger gaps around doors and drawers. Unfortunately, at least, where we are in New England and where you are, seasonal humidity means that the doors don't fit in the summer, and then you have to plane it down and then refinish it to make it work, all for free to fix it. How do you ensure that your inset doors are gonna work
I
year
guess
round?
luckily for me, we really don't do a lot of that, so I don't have I don't think I've actually have ever had that problem. Um, we do have problems where things do move and or joints will shift in a 5-piece door, and you just kind of have to deal with it. Like, yeah, if it, I guess the key would be if to do that as well. If you were doing inset doors and face frames and stuff, you just want to make sure the doors are, I guess, sized properly, and that they were fully finished on all sides and everything else. And that I would think that would slow down the movement quite a bit. I couldn't really, like, typically, well, we on our normal kind of cabinets, it's, well, in millimeters again, it's kind of a 2 to 2.5 millimeter gap between the fronts, which is
Pretty tight.
330 seconds or less.
Hmm.
And to have doors actually grow that much, I think that's a lot. I think maybe with a solid panel shaker type door, it might want to grow a little bit more, but you'd have to have some really tight margins to have that happen with all the finishing and everything we do as well. Like, we don't have things move too often.
Can you talk about two of three of your favorite projects? What are the coolest things you've had to do?
We did a project years ago. Architect that I've worked with for a long time did a really wild house on Pender Island, which is one of the Gulf islands between us and Vancouver Island. And it was this big rusted steel origami type house, and the seemingly unlimited budget, and all floating crazy cabinets and cantilevers. The kitchen island was one big full steel frame that was anchored down through the floor. They poured a huge footing down in the crawl space to anchor this steel island frame to. It was basically, I think it touched the ground, kind of a 4 foot by 3 foot section, but then it cantilevered out with a tabletop and banks of drawers and everything over this cantilever, probably 8 or 10 feet in 2 or 3 directions. And so that was really crazy. And we built a lot of that actually on site. They had a huge garage that they built as well, and we worked in there for a few months and got that project done. That was I'm sure that's probably the craziest house I'll ever work on. It
So
was,
you physically had to attach the cabinet boxes to this steel structure. Is that correct?
yeah,
How does
and
that
built
work?
a lot of pre-drilling and self-tapping screws and making the cabinet so they just slid inside the frame. I drew it all to try to make the framework work with what we wanted it to be. And then I don't think we got an engineer involved. Pretty sure we didn't. We just knew that it was overbuilt and just went for it, really.
When you draw stuff like that, do you use SketchUp or another computer's program, or are you drawing
I
that
used
by hand?
AutoCAD.
AutoCAD.
Yeah.
And did you learn that as part of your schooling, or did you teach yourself that?
I learned a little bit for my schooling, but not a whole
enough.
lot, but really the basics. And then the shop I was working at, I kind of got thrown into the office and was able to learn there, which was really good. And there was a couple of people that used it well, and I was able to get a lot of tips. And now I'm pretty good at it. I don't know how to do it in 3D. I do have another drawing program now that I use. It's called Mosaic. That's just for cabinets, and I'm still learning it, but it is, you basically kind of just, you set all your parameters and how you build your cabinet, and then basically just drag and drop cabinets onto the wall, and adjust the sizes and all the details of them, and modify everything. And then it can, if we had a CNC, it would basically just print it to the CNC, or now it prints the cut lists and all the drawings and everything else. I can make full easy drawings in all 3Ds, and sort of decent 3D renderings of it, which is nice to be able to present to clients and the shop, so they know, instead of looking at a 2D drawing all the time, so they know what they're actually building or clients are getting.
Does that help you optimize material too?
It will. I've struggled with it to make that worth it. The way that it does optimize the material doesn't really work cutting it up on a table saw. You have options to optimize it for cutting on a table saw, but it seems like you'd be doing a lot of weird resetting of the fence and adjusting things too many times. That we tried it once and it wasn't working. It was too many. Like the way we do it, you want to make as many rips as you can with the fence in the same spot,
Sure.
so all the pieces are the same, and then make as many cross cuts as you can with the fence in the same spot. But it was just mixing. You could have got away with doing the rips all at once, sort of, but the cross cuts, it was mixing all the different lengths of pieces together. So you would be changing the fence too many times, and just too many
Risking
errors.
error, right? It's the more you move stuff, the greater
And
chance you're going to.
at least if the saw is set and it's a 64th big or small, everything's that size, and that's it. If you're adjusting it 30 times to cut 30 different pieces, you're going to have problems.
I'm sure you've heard us talk about health problems related to trade work on this podcast and the regular podcast. Do you have any aches and pains related to being a cabinet maker for 20 years? And would you have any advice for folks who are starting out in trade work on how to protect themselves?
I always have, in the script you sent, you brought up hearing protection, I think, unless you were going to ask that again.
I was. You ruined it now.
I've always worn safety. Well, I used to wear glasses. I got laser surgery on my eyes 7 years ago or something like that. So now I still do wear safety glasses pretty much all the time. It's strange. Just the wind blowing off of a drill in my eyes is a strange thing that I never experienced, which was a weird thing right away. So I always wear safety glasses, and I've always been really careful with hearing. I've always had sensitive ears, so loud noises always were bad for me. So I always have just worn them. I have a sore back on and off, and when you're crawling and climbing around and carrying 100-pound cabinets all over the place and lifting and everything else, I get sore muscles, but really not anything more than that. So it's probably just try to be careful and not just kind of go for it like I do, and try to make things smaller. I've learned that over the years. I used to try to make things in one piece and move these giant units because it's so much easier to build it and assemble everything in the shop. But then you still have to move it in there and get it up on the wall, and you're building scaffolding or material lifts or whatever to try to get a 500-pound cabinet up on the wall. Doesn't really work.
And do you make sure that your employees are wearing their gear too? Is that something you tap them on the shoulder and say? I try
to, yeah. They're pretty good about it.
All right, you knew this was coming. Can you tell me about your own house? Have you made a new kitchen for it? Or do you get pressure?
It's as whatever the term is, the shoemakers. Children have no shoes. I basically have built all the furniture in the house, like all the beds and coffee tables and dressers and everything else. I've built all that. The kitchen is too much of a, well, if I could just build the kitchen, it would be fine. But means tearing out the kitchen and then flooring and tiling and electrical, and then maybe taking the wall down between the kitchen and the living room, and not just making a kitchen. So I made one bank of pantry cabinets that I could just put in. So that's a really nice part in our kitchen. But it didn't exist before, so it's just a nice wall of cabinets. But the rest of the kitchen is still just a 1990s strange laminate
And
round wrap.
what is your house like? What architectural style? And
It's like a 1,200 square foot rancher with a crawl space, and that's it. Two kids, so it's pretty tight with that size. I've got a garage that's full of stuff. And
do you like working on your own house? I've talked to many tradespeople, and some do and some don't, but I never did. When you work 40, 50, 60 hours a week doing carpentry, like the last thing you want to do is 12 hours of carpentry on the weekends.
Yeah, I don't mind it, but I guess really I actually probably would enjoy it because it is different. It's not cabinet making, and my crawl space was wet, and I actually in the summer had a guy come in, and it has a rat slab, but the vapor barrier was no good, and the water was coming up through the floor, and it was really damp down there. So I had a guy come in and dug a sump pump, which I don't think I really needed, but put a whole membrane and 10 mil vapor barrier up the walls and everything else. And I couldn't have done that. That's too much for me to take on when I'm trying to keep working. I would have had to take a week or two off work to do that.
I would take a week off to do something else other than crawl around the crawl space for a week. Yeah.
It wasn't it's not such a bad crawl space. It's about 2.5 feet or 3 feet. So it's not the worst crawl space around. But I would enjoy working on my house. It's always the time. All I'm doing is rushing, trying to get it done in some kind of a time frame, so that I don't enjoy that. If I had time to do it, I would enjoy it, but just not having the time is pretty difficult.
How old are your kids?
4 and 7.
Yeah, so you have no time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. My wife does a pretty amazing job of keeping up with them. So
does she work outside the home too?
No, she doesn't. So luckily we're able to do that. Kind of it just works for now. So I couldn't imagine having to have daycare and making it back and try to pick up kids by certain times and stuff. It would really cause me a lot of problems of having to leave jobs or just walk away when something needs to be finished to just go pick up the kids or something would be really difficult for me.
It's difficult for everyone, man.
Yeah, I bet.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Ben.
Thanks.
Anything you want to ask or tell our audience before we go?
I don't really think so, other than well, as is always said on these podcasts, of just try to get people into the trades, and the whole Keep Craft Alive movement is a great thing to try to make people actually realize that trades are a real way to live and earn a living and actually build things instead of kind of being at a computer all day and not actually achieving anything sort of that means something. Oh, obviously that's not the right way to say it, but yeah, it means something, of course. But
tangible things are important.
Is pretty good, and you can earn a good living doing it. Is a big thing for me.
Oh man, what's your company's website if you guys have one? So folks
I don't
can
have
look
one.
at.
I've got Instagram is Stickle Cabinets. That's just our Instagram thing. I don't have a website. We usually have too much work. Like right now, we're booked up until September or October at least. So I kind of don't feel like I don't ever really need a website to add more.
Right, and then that's something else you have to take care of when you have
exactly.
it, right?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Ben Scott for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive, and happy building. Thank you.